In this tutorial, we're going to write some code to generate a sample XML dataset, and then we're going to use that dataset to generate a ReportMill template in ReportMill, and then we're going to integrate that template back into our Java application and use that to generate a report at runtime. So I'm going to start in my IDE, and any IDE will do. We're going to use our favorite one called Java Inventor here. And I'm going to open up my project, and this project is empty. It just has a connection to a database with a movies table in it. And the movies table has attributes for title and studio and show date, etc. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a Java file. And I'm just going to call this write.xml. Click OK, and I get an empty Java file. Then I'm going to make it conveniently a base class that has a nice main method. And so I'll create the main method. And the first thing I need to do is fetch the data set. So the data set can be pretty much anything. It can be plain old Java objects fetched using an object relational mapping tool, or it can be EJBs, or it can be a JDBC result set fetched using standard JDBC, Java collections. In this case, I'm going to use Java collections fetched with the built-in facility here. And so it's going to be a list of row, which is actually just a map subclass. So the rows is equal to, and I'll get the site, and I want to fetch the rows using a query. And the query is going to be on the movies table. And I'm not going to add any conditions here. It's just going to fetch all the movies from that table for our sample data set. And then I want to write the data set to XML. And so we're going to do this using a very simple ReportMill object called the RMXML writer. So I'll create one of those. And then I'll simply tell it to write object, and I'll pass it the rows. And I want it to write that to my desktop. So I'll say desktop dataset.xml. So that's it. With those 2 lines of code, I fetched a sample data set, and then I told the XML writer to write it out. So I'll go ahead and run this. And it runs, and the process completes. And here's our data set. I'm going to move it to the other side of the screen here. Then I'm going to hide my IDE, and I'm going to go into ReportMill. And creating a basic report is covered in another tutorial, but I'll go ahead and create a simple header here. And I'll make this bigger and bolder, and I'll center it, and I'll put a background color on it and a background stroke and center it vertically. And then I'll drag and drop in our data set. And it brings up the keys browser, and it shows us all of our objects with the title and the show date. And I'm going to drag this list back into the template. And as a list, it's going to want to show as a list object, like tables or labels or a graph. And I'll choose the table, and I'll position and size the table to cover the region of the page I want all the rows to cover. And then I'll drag in, with the table selected, it shows me the keys for an individual movie. And I'll just drag and drop in some of the keys, title and show date and revenue. And I'll get rid of this last column. Revenue, I'll align to the right, and I'll put a money formatter on it. And I'll make this column a little smaller, and then I'll make title a little bigger. And then I'll do a preview, and boom, here's our report template using that sample data set. So now I'm just going to save this template to my desktop. And I'll click Save, and so there it is, and I'll move it over to the other side. And I'll go ahead and hide ReportMill now, and I'll bring my IDE back up. And then I'll just drag and drop this template into my project. And then here's the report inside the project. And so I'll go back to my code file. And so instead of writing an XML data set this time, I'll comment that out. This time I want to generate report as PDF. So the first thing I'm going to do is load that template up. So I'll say RM document is the template class. I'll create a template local variable here, and I'll say new RM document, And the constructor here takes pretty much anything as a source. We can send it a string path or a input stream or a byte array or a SQL blob or a file object. I'm going to go ahead and tell my site here to get the file for my movie report.rpt. I'll save that. And then I'm going to create another document variable for my report. And I get a report just by saying template generate report. And I'm going to pass it the rows parameter. And so this is important. The data set that we pass in here determines what our report is going to be. So if instead of just fetching all the movies, we only fetch the movies that made more than $1 million, then we'd have the blockbuster report. Or if we fetched all the movies that had a PG rating, we'd have the family movies report. But I have a report generated now, and then I can ask that report for its PDF bytes, or I can ask it for its HTML bytes. In this case, I'm going to tell the report to just write to my desktop again. And I'm going to say my report.pdf. And so that's it. So I'll just run this. And it runs, and the process completes. And here's my report. And if I double click on it, there it is in the platform PDF viewer. And so, similarly, we can ask for those bytes. If I just say bytes is equal to report get bytes PDF, then we'll have those bytes, and we can append those to an HTTP response, set the content to application PDF, and return that. Same thing with HTML. So generating a report from your application only takes a few lines of code to first generate the data set, use that to create your template, and then just 3 lines of code to load the template, generate report, and send it back to the client. And this is the end of our tutorial.